Hello there, my name is Ink, and welcome to the Campfire. Tonight I would be sharing a story called An Apple a Day. I grew up in a small town deep in the heart of Appalachia. So deep that the cell phones are spotty at best and most just plain don't work. Things don't change much in a place like that. Neither the customs nor the people, and if you look at our linguistic categorization, you'll find that our particular brand of dialect has remained largely unchanged for the better part of 200 years. Still, it's hard to be a modern kid and believe all those crazy tales that the old folks spin. To say that I was skeptical of the yarns my grandmother spun by the fire on long winter nights is a given, but I usually try to keep my tongue held out of respect for her. There were a few times, though, that I heard a light snicker slip out of my mouth when she would end the story with, "We here in the hollers remember things the rest of the world forgets. We keep the watch in the night, and the memory of the old ways alive. We here in the hollers, we don't forget." In those instances, she would just click her tongue at me and look at me like she was sizing me up. I was 16, the fall that grandma got sick and descended quickly onto death's doorstep. One thing that always scared me about her in those last few months was that she was in and out of reality, swimming in the sea of time, so you could never really quite tell what name she would call you by. It was pretty different from the quick-witted grandmother I had grown up with. It was one of her good days, one of her last, that I was visiting her on a day deep in autumn turning winter, and she asked me, "Jackie, my boy, how old are you now?" "16, ma'am, be 17 come next July," I replied, curious as to the reason for the question. I watched as she seemed to weigh something, and then told me to have a seat on a stool near where she sat at the dining room table. She gave me that considering look before deciding something, then commenting in a low, serious voice that I recognized as her yawning tone. "Old enough, I reckon, and you're a lot like I was at your age. So maybe you'll listen where the other young'uns ain't of a mind to." I settled into the seat by her side for the inevitably long story that she had in mind, just hoping that she would stay lucid long enough to finish the whole thing for the first time in months. She started innocently enough with a story from when she was a girl. Not the first or the 1,000 of those I'd heard, but it quickly took a much darker turn than normal. I was 15 years old when my pappy died of consumption. Back in them days when a man died, you had a proper wake, complete with a 3-day viewing and the long line of mourners coming in and out of the house to the point where you forgot who was a mourner and who was just there for a bite of free pie. At any rate, it was the middle of all that, round sunset of the second night, when my Aunt Josephine started talking about the cartman. Everybody hushed up real quiet, and my Grammy told my aunt to keep her mouth shut about the doctor. That them old wives' tales only apply to wicked men. But my aunt kept pointing out that the cartman probably came for everybody at the same, and that Pappy's soul was in danger of being taken. Grammy wouldn't hear nothing of it, and by, Aunt Josie got off her jawing about the doctor this and the cartman that. Well, I had heard enough stories about the cartman to want to see it for myself, so I set about staying up all night with my cousin Ellie. It was about midnight when the animals went quiet, except for the nervous whinnies of the horses in the barn over on the next property. Everybody except me and Ellie were either asleep or gone home for the night, so we was the only ones that saw the way the wind whipped about and how the clouds up in the sky had the low blue tinge like just before a tornado. Ellie heard him first, the low clip-clop of horses giving away somebody rounding the last bend towards the house. All we could see was the outline of a dark carriage with an even more darkly cloaked man at the helm, holding the reins. He stopped about halfway between the neighbor's house and ours, and he was the biggest man I had ever seen, or have seen since. Every bit of 7 feet tall. He raised back his head and looked to be sniffing at the air for a few minutes, before making his way to my grandparents' front stoop. The goosebumps I had getting bigger by the second. Ellie was the first to break the death grip we had on each other, and she dragged me by the hand behind the couch just before the cartman opened the front door like it wasn't even locked. We could see that the thing, for that was no man, had skin the color of the full moon and no eyes. Its giant row of teeth showing as it passed us not 5 feet away on its course to Pappy's body. He put his mouth up to Pappy's lips and breathed in once. What happened next you ain't gonna believe, but I swear on a stack of 10 of the good book that it happened. I seen Pappy. Well, I reckon it was his spirit, raised up out of his body and hop out of the wooden coffin. You could see that he was crying, the only time I'd ever seen him do that. And he started begging for mercy, but the cartman wasn't having none of that. It said, "Thomas McKee, you helped lynch the man after you ran 2 girls off the road driving drunk and just left them there to die. You owe a debt, a mighty big one, and you'll work off every second of it for me before you set 1 foot on the other side." Pappy took to crying even harder as he followed the cartman outside. Seemed to not really have a choice. And we got to the window just in time to see Pappy being changed into a wheel spoke. We heard the cartman say through the screen door before he took off again, "You'll make a mighty fine spoke, but quit your blubbering. You got lucky." The next man we go to see is going to be riding in the back. One-way delivery, you might say. No working off what he's done. Poor fool came wandering out from town. They do that sometimes. I can't get to the ones in the larger towns much. Too much death and decay to sniff them out properly. But then they don't go on properly and eventually wander out here. Even if it does sometimes take a century or 2. The man pulled the reins and went trotting away after he got up in his seat again, and I never did have the heart to tell Grammy what happened, only urged the word off the cartman for the rest of my life. And now I want you to make sure that you do the same for me. I ain't done much bad in my life, but there's enough there that maybe I owe a debt to the cartman. Grandma, what is the way to ride off the cartman? I asked, too stunned at the story to do much else. There's a saying that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, that most folks think is talking about your health, but it ain't. The cartman is blind as a bat jockey, but he's got the nose of a bloodhound. You set out a bowl of apple juice, so make sure that I drink some of it regularly at least a few days before I pass on. The smell of the apple juice will cover the smell of my death, enough to confuse him, and he won't be able to snag me. I just sat there, numb, not knowing what I should say or do. Finally, I reasoned that if it would make an old woman feel good on her deathbed, then so be it. After all, what was the harm in telling her I'd do it just to ease her mind? After I'd promised her, a big wash of relief went over her face and she said, Why don't you fetch me a glass now? Grandma died 3 weeks later in her sleep, and in her honor, it was to be a regular old-fashioned wake, complete with relatives coming in from all over the country. Dad told me that a man honors his word when he gives it to somebody, especially an elder. So I made sure to set out the apple juice the night the wake started, even though I thought the whole thing was bonkers. Still, I had to see if there was anything to it. My curiosity simply got the best of me. It was midnight when the old-fashioned carriage pulled up, and a man at least 7 feet tall stepped down from the front of it. I could see from the light of the nearly full moon that the clouds had tint blue, and the man had skin the color of a corpse. He was dressed all in black from head to toe, and he kept sniffing at the air. When he got to the front porch, I thought for sure that the apple juice had failed. But the man put his hand on the door before taking one last sniff, turning around and walking back to his carriage. I insisted on putting out apple juice after every death now. And when folks ask me why and my younger cousins make fun of me, all I can really do is say as I shake my head, "We here in the hollows remember things the rest of the world forgets. We keep the watch in the night and the memory of the old days alive. We here in the hollows, we don't forget."